Victoria Linfield's heart hammered in her chest as she plunged through the dense underbrush, the shouts of her father and brothers echoing behind her. The skirts of her once pristine blue dress caught on thorny branches, tearing the fabric she'd spent weeks sewing. But she couldn't stop, not when her very future depended on these desperate moments of flight. "Get back here, girl." Her father's voice boomed across the wooded terrain. "You ain't running from your responsibilities." The year was 1878, and at 20 years old, Victoria had just committed the ultimate betrayal in her family's eyes. She had refused to marry Harrison Whitmore, the wealthy mine owner who had offered her father an obscene sum to take her as his third wife. Harrison was nearly 50, with a reputation for cruelty that made Victoria's skin crawl. "I'd rather die than be sold like cattle," she muttered through gritted teeth as she pushed herself faster, the sound of rushing water growing louder ahead. Victoria's long chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner. The evening sun cast long shadows through the trees of western Colorado, not far from the struggling settlement of Delta. Her family's homestead lay 5 miles outside town, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry to sympathetic ears. "She's heading for the Gunnison," she heard her eldest brother Jeremiah shout. "Cut her off at the bend." Victoria's lungs burned as she broke through the tree line, the raging Gunnison River before her swollen with spring melt from the mountains. Its churning waters looked treacherous, but less so than the fate that awaited her if she returned home. Her father would beat her senseless before dragging her to the altar, where she'd be handed to Harrison like a package. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Victoria glanced back to see her father's imposing frame emerging from the forest, his face contorted with rage, flanked by her 3 brothers. There was no kindness in their expressions, only determination to bring back the family's prize cow to market. "Victoria," her father bellowed, "you come back this instant or I swear I'll make you wish you were never born." She knew it wasn't an idle threat. Her mother had died under similar declarations, worked to death to satisfy Gerald Linfield's ambitions. Now Victoria was the family's last tradable asset. Without further hesitation, she gathered her torn skirts and plunged into the frigid waters of the Gunnison. The shock of cold stole her breath as the current immediately caught her, pulling her away from the bank with frightening speed. She heard curses and shouts behind her, but couldn't look back as she fought to keep her head above water. "Let her drown," she heard one of her brothers shout. "Ain't worth getting wet for." Victoria's limbs quickly numbed in the mountain-fed river. She struggled against the pull of the water, but each movement became more laborious as her sodden clothing weighed her down. She managed to grasp a floating branch, clinging to it desperately as the river carried her farther from her pursuers. The rushing water filled her ears, drowning out the voices of her family. The current spun her around, disorienting her completely. One moment she saw the shore, the next only sky, then water as she was pulled under. Each time she surfaced, she gasped desperately for air, swallowing as much water as oxygen. Just as her strength began to fail, when her fingers could barely maintain their grip on the branch, Victoria felt the current shift. The river widened, its force somewhat diminished. But it was too late. Her numb hands slipped from the wood, and she went under again. This time, darkness crept at the edges of her vision. As she fought to the surface one final time, she saw a figure on horseback galloping along the riverbank. The rider dismounted in a fluid motion and dove into the water. Strong arms encircled her waist, pulling her toward the surface, toward air. Victoria coughed and sputtered as her rescuer swam powerfully against the current, guiding them both toward the far shore. "I've got you," a deep voice assured her as they neared the bank. "Just hold on." With the last of her consciousness, Victoria felt herself being lifted from the water and carried up the rocky embankment. Her savior laid her gently on dry ground, where she rolled to her side, expelling river water from her lungs in painful heaves. When she finally looked up, she saw a man kneeling beside her, concern etched across his sun-weathered face. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and despite her dire circumstances, Victoria couldn't help but notice how they crinkled at the corners as relief washed over his features. "You're alive," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "For a moment there I thought the river had claimed you." Victoria tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. The man helped her sit up, supporting her back with a steady hand. "Lucas O'Connor," he introduced himself, removing his soaked hat with his free hand. "Rancher from over the ridge." "And you are, Victoria," she managed, her voice raspy. "Victoria Linfield." Lucas glanced across the river, his expression hardening. "Those men pursuing you, they didn't look friendly." "My family," Victoria whispered, fear returning as she followed his gaze. They were trying to force me to marry." Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes. "Well, Miss Linfield, they're on the other side now, and it doesn't look like they're planning to cross. That current's too dangerous even for a determined father." Victoria turned to see her family gathered on the distant shore. Even from this distance, she could sense her father's fury. He raised a fist in her direction before spitting on the ground and turning away. Her brothers lingered a moment longer before following him back toward the trees. "They're leaving," Victoria whispered, disbelief and relief mingling in her voice. "For now," Lucas cautioned. He stood, water dripping from his clothes, and extended a hand to help her up. "But we shouldn't linger. Night's coming and you need dry clothes and a warm fire before the chill sets in." Victoria accepted his hand, unsteady on her feet as exhaustion began to claim her. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. Lucas studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he whistled sharply, and a beautiful chestnut mare trotted over from where she'd been waiting patiently. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here," he said, guiding Victoria toward the horse. "You can rest there tonight, figure things out in the morning." As Lucas helped her mount the mare before climbing up behind her, Victoria felt the warmth of his chest against her back. His arms encircled her to take the reins, providing both security and strange comfort. "Thank you," she murmured as the horse began to move, carrying them away from the river, away from her past. "You saved my life." "Any decent man would have done the same," Lucas replied. But there was a softness in his voice that suggested perhaps there was more to his actions than mere decency. As they rode together through the gathering dusk, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope. The river had nearly taken her life, but it had also washed away her old existence. What lay ahead remained uncertain, but for this moment, cradled safely in a stranger's arms, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the steady beat of Lucas's heart against her back lulled Victoria into a state between wakefulness and sleep. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the forest and river was ebbing, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and the first tendrils of pain from countless scratches and bruises. "Stay awake, Miss Linfield," Lucas urged gently, his breath warm against her ear. "We're almost there, but I need you conscious a while longer." Victoria forced her eyes open, focusing on the landscape unfolding before them. The terrain was different on this side of the river, less densely forested, opening into rolling meadows dotted with wildflowers that glowed silver in the emerging moonlight. In the distance, mountains loomed, their snow-capped peaks catching the last pink rays of the setting sun. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "That it is," Lucas agreed. Most folks pass through these parts looking for gold or silver, never noticing the real treasure is the land itself. They crested a small rise, and below them stretched a modest but well-maintained ranch. A sturdy log cabin stood proudly alongside a large barn and corral. Several horses nickered in greeting as they approached, and Victoria spotted cattle grazing in a distant pasture. "O'Connor Ranch," Lucas announced with undisguised pride. "Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's mine, free and clear." As they neared the cabin, a light appeared in the window and the door swung open. An elderly man with a shock of white hair stepped onto the porch, squinting into the darkness. "That you, Lucas?" "You're late for supper." The old man's words died as he noticed Victoria. "What in tarnation?" "Found her in the river, Walter," Lucas explained as he dismounted, then reached up to help Victoria down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and Lucas caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. "She needs dry clothes and something hot to drink." Walter hurried forward, concern replacing his surprise. "Bring her inside, boy. I'll stoke the fire." The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with hand-hewn furniture and colorful woven rugs covering the plank floors. A large fireplace dominated one wall, its flames leaping higher as Walter added more logs. Lucas carried Victoria to a rocking chair near the hearth and gently set her down. "Walter's been with me since I started this ranch 5 years ago," Lucas explained as the older man disappeared into another room. "Best cook and ranch hand a man could ask for, though he'd never admit it." "I heard that," Walter called, returning with an armful of clothing. "And flattery won't get you extra biscuits." He handed the bundle to Victoria. "These belonged to Lucas's sister when she visited last summer. They might be a bit large, but they're clean and dry." Victoria accepted the clothes gratefully. "Thank you, mister. Just Walter, miss." "No need for formalities here." He turned to Lucas. "I'll heat up some stew while the lady changes. You ought to get out of those wet clothes yourself before you catch your death." Lucas nodded and disappeared behind a door Victoria presumed led to his bedroom. Walter showed her to a small side room with a wash basin and privacy screen. "Take your time, miss. No one's rushing you here." Alone for the first time since her desperate plunge into the river, Victoria leaned against the wall and allowed herself a moment of pure relief. Her hands trembled as she peeled off her soaked and torn dress, the cold fabric clinging stubbornly to her skin. The clothes Walter had provided, a simple calico dress, woolen stockings, and a thick cardigan, were indeed too large but wonderfully dry. After washing her face and attempting to untangle her hair with her fingers, Victoria emerged to find Lucas already seated at the table, dressed in clean clothes, his damp hair combed back from his forehead. He stood when she entered, an instinctive gesture of respect that surprised her. "Better?" he asked, pulling out a chair for her. Victoria nodded, suddenly shy under his attentive gaze. "Much, thank you." Walter placed bowls of steaming stew before them, along with thick slices of bread still warm from the oven. The aroma made Victoria's stomach growl audibly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since morning. "Eat," Walter encouraged. "Nothing solves problems better than a full belly." For several minutes they ate in companionable silence. Victoria hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. The stew was rich with vegetables and tender beef, the bread perfect for sopping up the savory broth. She tried to maintain proper manners, but her hunger won out, and she devoured the meal with unladylike speed. Lucas seemed to sense her embarrassment and offered her more bread. "You've had quite a day, Miss Linfield. No one would fault you for having an appetite." Victoria accepted the bread with a grateful smile. "Please, call me Victoria. After fishing me from a river, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Victoria, then." The way he said her name softly, with a slight lilt, made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "If you don't mind my asking, what drove you to such desperate measures today?" Setting down her spoon, Victoria took a deep breath. These men had saved her life. They deserved the truth. "My father arranged my marriage to Harrison Whitmore," she began, noting how Lucas's expression darkened at the name. "He's a mine owner from Denver, wealthy and influential." "And 3 times my age," she added bitterly. "Whitmore," Walter interjected. "That the fellow who owns the Silver Peak mine. Heard he's buried 3 wives already." Victoria nodded grimly. "My father didn't care about those rumors. He only saw the bride price enough to pay off our farm debts and then some." Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. "When I refused, he said I had no choice, that I belonged to him until I belonged to a husband." Lucas's jaw tightened. "No person belongs to another, not in this country." "Not anymore." "My father disagrees," Victoria said softly. "When I tried to run away this morning, he and my brothers caught me. They locked me in the root cellar until the wedding arrangements could be finalized." Her voice wavered. "I managed to pry open the door when they were occupied with dinner. I ran and they pursued. The river wasn't part of my plan, but it seemed preferable to the alternative." Walter let out a low whistle. "Mighty brave of you, miss." Lucas studied her with newfound respect. "Or desperate?" "Both, I suppose," Victoria admitted. "And now I've lost everything. My home, my family, what few possessions I had." The reality of her situation suddenly overwhelmed her, and she blinked rapidly to hold back tears. "You've gained your freedom," Lucas said firmly. "That's worth more than any possession." Victoria looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "Freedom to do what, exactly? I have no money, no skills beyond keeping house and basic farm work." Lucas exchanged a glance with Walter before answering. "Delta's growing fast since the railroad spur came through last year. There's work for those willing to do it. And until you find your footing, you're welcome to stay here." Walter nodded in agreement. "Spare room's been empty since Lucas's sister moved to California. Might as well have someone in it." Victoria stared at them, stunned by their generosity. "You hardly know me. I could be anyone. Most thieves and con artists don't jump into raging rivers to escape their families," Lucas pointed out with a hint of amusement. "Besides, I'm a fair judge of character. Always have been." "It's settled then," Walter declared, standing to clear the dishes. "You'll stay until you decide what comes next. No obligation beyond helping with household chores, which I reckon you can manage." Victoria wanted to protest further, to warn them that her father might come looking for her, that harboring her might bring trouble to their peaceful ranch. But exhaustion was claiming her rapidly, and the prospect of a safe place to sleep tonight was too tempting to refuse. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Lucas smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. "Sometimes kindness isn't meant to be repaid, Victoria. Sometimes it's just meant to be passed along when you find someone else in need." Walter showed her to the spare room, a cozy space with a narrow bed covered in a colorful patchwork quilt. "Bathrooms down the hall. There's water in the pitcher for washing up and towels in the chest. If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to ask." Left alone, Victoria sank onto the bed, emotions finally overwhelming her. She wept quietly for relief, for fear, for the uncertain future. When her tears were spent, she washed her face in the cool water and slipped beneath the quilt. Despite her tumultuous day, sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. For the first time in years, Victoria Linfield slept without fear of what the morning would bring. Dawn broke with a chorus of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Victoria awoke disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings momentarily confusing until memory rushed back. The river. The rescue. Lucas O'Connor. She rose and dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, plaiting her still damp hair into a simple braid. When she emerged from her room, she found the cabin empty but for a note on the kitchen table. Gone to check the north pasture. Breakfast in the warming oven. Make yourself at home. Lucas, the gesture touched her. Victoria found fresh biscuits, bacon, and eggs keeping warm as promised. She ate hungrily, then set about washing the dishes and tidying the kitchen. It was the least she could do to begin repaying their hospitality. With the morning chores complete, Victoria ventured outside, breathing deeply of the clear mountain air. The ranch was even more impressive in daylight, nestled in a small valley with a creek running along its western edge, surrounded by rolling grasslands that gave way to forested mountains. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and horses grazed peacefully in a nearby corral. Victoria was admiring the view when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Lucas approached on horseback, his lean frame silhouetted against the morning sun. He rode with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle, and Victoria found herself watching him with appreciative eyes. "Good morning," he called, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Sleep well, better than I have in years," Victoria admitted. "Your home is beautiful." "Thank you." Lucas removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's been hard work, but worth every blister and sunburn." He gestured toward the mountains. "Most of what you can see from here is O'Connor land, about 2,000 acres. Not the biggest spread in the county, but enough to keep me busy." "You've accomplished a lot for a young man," Victoria observed. Lucas couldn't be much past 30, yet he spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had found his purpose in life. "Started young," he explained, leading his horse toward the barn. Victoria fell into step beside him. "My pa was a 49er who struck it moderately rich in California. Used the money to buy this land when Colorado was still just a territory. He taught me ranching from the time I could walk." "And your family, are they nearby?" A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "Lost pa to pneumonia 5 winters ago. Ma couldn't bear to stay after that, moved back east to live with my sister in San Francisco." He shrugged. "They visit sometimes, but city life suits them better." "I'm sorry about your father," Victoria said softly. Lucas nodded his acknowledgement as they reached the barn. "Walter's been like family since then. Man could have retired years ago, but he claims he'd just die of boredom." Inside the barn, Lucas removed his horse's saddle and began brushing the animal down. Victoria leaned against a stall door, watching his methodical movements. "Mr. O'Connor, Lucas," he corrected. "If I'm calling you Victoria, it's only fair," she smiled. "Lucas, then. I've been thinking about your offer to stay, and while I'm immensely grateful, I can't impose indefinitely. Perhaps there's work in town I could find, a room I could rent." Lucas continued brushing his horse, seemingly contemplating her words. "There's the Delta Hotel that sometimes needs help. The general store, too. But rooms for single women are scarce and without references." He left the implication hanging. Victoria understood the challenges a woman alone faced in a frontier town. Without family or connections, finding respectable work and lodging would be difficult. "What if you stayed here," Lucas suggested, "and worked for your keep until you've saved enough to establish yourself properly?" "Walter's been after me to hire help for the house since he's getting too old for both ranch and household duties." Victoria hesitated. "I wouldn't want to create gossip." Lucas's laugh was unexpected. "Walter's presence provides all the propriety needed. Besides, Delta folks know me. I've a reputation to maintain as the dullest bachelor in the county." "Dullest? I find that hard to believe for a man who dives into rivers to rescue drowning women. That was an exception to my typically boring existence, he assured her with a grin that suggested he was anything but dull. What do you say, Victoria? Stay as my housekeeper until you find your feet. The offer was generous and practical. Victoria couldn't deny the appeal of remaining in this peaceful place, away from the immediate threat of her family's reach. I accept, she said. But I insist on a fair wage, documented so there's no misunderstanding of our arrangement. Lucas extended his hand, and they shook on it formally. Welcome to O'Connor Ranch, Miss Linfield. You start today. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Victoria settled into life at the ranch. Lucas was a fair employer, providing her with a written agreement for wages and responsibilities that left her feeling secure in their arrangement. Walter seemed delighted to relinquish the cooking and cleaning duties, focusing instead on his preferred ranch work. Victoria discovered she had a knack for organizing the chaotic bachelor household. She cleaned thoroughly, arranged the pantry systematically, and prepared meals that had both men praising her culinary skills. In the evenings, they would gather in the main room, Walter telling tall tales of his youth while Lucas mended tack or whittled intricate wooden figures. It was a peaceful existence, but Victoria remained vigilant. Each day, she scanned the horizon, half expecting to see her father and brothers riding toward the ranch. Lucas noticed her anxiety and sought to reassure her. TheGunnisons still high from spring runoff. He told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The nearest crossing is the bridge in town, and that's a good 20 miles from where your family would have to start. Even if they knew where you were, it's not an easy journey. You don't know my father, Victoria replied, her hands fidgeting with her apron. He doesn't give up what he considers his property, and Harrison Whitmore isn't a man accustomed to disappointment. Lucas studied her profile, noting the tension in her jaw. You're safe here, Victoria, I promise you that. She turned to meet his gaze, searching his eyes for any hint of uncertainty. Finding none, she nodded slowly. I believe you. Their conversation was interrupted by Walter's appearance at the door. Rider coming, he announced. Looks like Thomas Jenkins from town. Lucas stood, his expression curious rather than concerned. Wonder what brings him out this way so late. They watched as a man on a dappled gray horse approached the ranch house, waving as he drew near. Thomas Jenkins was the postmaster in Delta, a jovial man in his 50s with a perpetual smile beneath his bushy mustache. Evening, O'Connor, he called, reining in his horse. Sorry to disturb you after supper. No disturbance, Tom, Lucas assured him. Climb down and rest a spell. Jenkins dismounted, tipping his hat to Victoria. Evening, madam. You must be the new housekeeper Walter mentioned when he was in town. Victoria nodded, relieved that her presence had already been explained in a respectable context. What brings you out this way? Lucas asked, offering the postmaster a seat on the porch. Two things, Jenkins replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Walter. First, got a telegram for you about that bull you've been inquiring after. Owner in Denver says he'll hold him until next month's stock auction. Lucas nodded. Appreciate you bringing the news. And the second matter, Jenkins's expression grew more serious. Thought you should know there's been strangers in town asking questions. 3 men and an older fellow rough-looking bunch. Been showing around a daguerreotype of a young woman, offering a reward for information. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Lucas's hand found hers, squeezing gently in reassurance. What sort of questions? Lucas asked, his voice carefully neutral. Wanting to know if anyone matching her description had come through town recently. Said she was a runaway daughter, mentally unstable and in need of her family's care. Jenkins glanced at Victoria. "I gather from your reaction, madam, that you might be acquainted with these individuals." Victoria's throat felt dry. "My father and brothers," she whispered. Jenkins nodded sagely. "Thought as much. Sheriff Holloway didn't take kindly to them. Said if the girl was grown, she had every right to go where she pleased. The older man, your father, I reckon got mighty heated about that. Sheriff suggested they move along before he decided to investigate their story more thoroughly." "Did they leave town?" Lucas asked. "Headed out this morning, but I couldn't say in which direction." Jenkins finished his coffee. "Folks in town weren't too forthcoming with them. Delta's a small place, but we mind our own business." "Thank you for the warning, Tom," Lucas said, standing to shake the man's hand. "We appreciate you riding out." Jenkins mounted his horse, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "One more thing, they left that photograph with the barkeep at the Silver Dollar, offering $50 to anyone who brings information. Just so you know." After the postmaster had ridden away, Victoria sat in stunned silence, her earlier fears confirmed. They were looking for her, and they wouldn't stop easily. $50 is a lot of money," she finally said. "Someone will talk eventually." Lucas paced the porch, his expression thoughtful. "We need to establish your presence here openly, make it clear you're working legitimately. If we try to hide you, it only lends credence to their claims." "How do we do that?" Victoria asked. "We go to town," Lucas decided. "Tomorrow, you, me, and Walter. We'll visit the general store, the church, introduce you properly. Once people see you're well and working of your own free will, they'll be less inclined to believe tales of mental instability." Walter, who had been quietly listening, nodded his agreement. "Good folk in Delta. Once they know you, they'll stand by you. And if my father returns while we're there—" Victoria couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. Lucas's expression hardened. "Then he'll learn that in Colorado territory, a woman of age can choose her own path, and that some choices can't be undone with threats or bride prices." The confidence in his voice steadied her. "Very well. We'll go to town tomorrow." That night, Victoria lay awake long after retiring to her room. The knowledge that her family was actively searching for her had shattered her growing sense of security. Would she ever be truly free of them? And what of Harrison Whitmore, a man with wealth and connections far beyond her father's? If he had set his mind on having her, would he simply accept her disappearance? A soft knock interrupted her troubled thoughts. She rose and opened the door to find Lucas standing there, a concerned expression on his face. "I saw your light still burning," he explained. "Thought you might be needing something." Victoria shook her head. "Just my thoughts keeping me awake. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "No disturbance." Lucas hesitated, then extended his hand. In it was a small pistol, its handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "I thought you might sleep better with this nearby." Victoria stared at the weapon, then back at Lucas. "I've never fired a gun." "I'll teach you tomorrow," he promised. "But for tonight, just knowing it's there might help chase away some fears." She accepted the pistol gingerly. "Thank you." Lucas lingered a moment longer, seemingly on the verge of saying something else. Instead, he simply nodded. "Good night, Victoria. Try to rest. Tomorrow's a new day." As he turned to go, Victoria called after him softly. "Lucas," he paused, looking back. "Why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me." In the dim lamplight, his expression was difficult to read. "Let's just say I recognize the look of someone fighting for the right to choose their own path. Sleep well, Victoria." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Victoria dressed in her borrowed clothes, freshly laundered and pressed. She had managed to alter the dress slightly for a better fit, though it still hung somewhat loose on her frame. Her hair she arranged in a simple but neat style, wanting to present a composed appearance to the townspeople. When she emerged from her room, Lucas was waiting in the main area, dressed in his best clothes, clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He wore his gun belt low on his hips, a silent statement of capability. "You look nice," he said, the compliment genuine if somewhat awkwardly delivered. "Thank you," Victoria replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "These aren't my clothes, but I've tried to make them presentable." "We'll remedy that today," Lucas assured her. "The general store carries fabric and notions. Consider it an advance on your wages." Walter joined them, also in his Sunday best. "Wagon's ready whenever you are." The journey to Delta took just over an hour, the wagon following a well-worn trail that wound through pastureland and stands of aspen. Victoria sat between the two men, increasingly nervous as they approached civilization. Delta had grown considerably since the railroad spur's completion the previous year. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted several streets of businesses and homes, with new construction underway on the outskirts. The main street featured a hotel, general store, bank, church, and the inevitable saloons that serviced the miners and cowboys passing through. Lucas parked the wagon in front of the general store, helping Victoria down with a steadying hand at her elbow. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Victoria took a deep breath and nodded. Together they entered the store, the bell above the door announcing their arrival. Martha Reynolds, the proprietor's wife, looked up from behind the counter. "Lucas O'Connor, twice in 1 month we're honored," she teased. Her curious gaze shifted to Victoria. "And who might this be?" Lucas performed the introduction smoothly. "Mrs. Reynolds, may I present Miss Victoria Linfield, recently of Denver. She's taken the position of housekeeper at my ranch." Victoria extended her hand, relieved when the older woman shook it warmly. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Reynolds." "Likewise, dear." Martha's shrewd eyes assessed Victoria quickly. "Walter must be pleased to have help with those 2 bachelor slobs." Lucas laughed. "He's fairly dancing with joy, madam." For the next hour they shopped for fabric, thread, and other necessities. Martha was full of gossip about town happenings, including a pointed mention of those unsavory characters asking questions the day before. "Sheriff Holloway didn't like the look of them one bit," Martha confided as she measured out calico. "Especially when the older one started making threats about rights to his property. Sheriff reminded him that people aren't property in Colorado territory." By the time they left the store, laden with purchases, Victoria felt marginally more at ease. Martha Reynolds had clearly accepted Lucas's explanation of her presence, and in a small town like Delta, the storekeeper's wife's opinion carried significant weight. Their next stop was the church, where they found Reverend Matthews tending the small garden beside the whitewashed building. "Lucas, my boy," the minister greeted them cheerfully. "And Walter, what brings you to town on a Tuesday?" Again, Lucas introduced Victoria, explaining her position at the ranch. The Reverend welcomed her warmly to the community, inviting her to Sunday services and the ladies' quilting circle that met weekly. "It's important for newcomers to make connections," he said kindly, "especially young women far from family." "Thank you, Reverend," Victoria replied, genuinely touched by his welcome. "I'd be delighted to attend." Their final stop was the sheriff's office, a deliberate choice on Lucas's part. Sheriff Holloway was a former Texas Ranger who had settled in Delta after the war, bringing with him a reputation for fairness and a no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. The sheriff was at his desk when they entered, reading through wanted posters with a furrowed brow. He looked up, recognition and something like understanding crossing his weathered features when he saw Victoria. "Mr. O'Connor," he greeted Lucas, standing to shake his hand. I believe I met some relatives of your companion yesterday. Lucas nodded. That's partly why we're here, Sheriff. I'd like to introduce Miss Victoria Linfield, who has recently taken employment at my ranch as housekeeper. Sheriff Holloway studied Victoria thoughtfully. Those men claimed their daughter was unstable, in need of family care. You don't look unstable to me, Miss Linfield. I'm perfectly sound of mind, Sheriff, Victoria assured him. What I am is unwilling to be forced into marriage with a man 3 times my age for my father's financial benefit. The sheriff nodded slowly. I suspected as much. The older man had a certain, mercenary look about him. He sat back down, gesturing for them to take seats opposite his desk. They might return, you understand. The reward they're offering is substantial. $50 for information, we heard, Lucas confirmed. Up to 100 now, the sheriff corrected. They increased it before leaving town. He focused on Victoria. How old are you, miss? 20 last March, she replied. Then you're legally entitled to make your own decisions. Sheriff Holloway's expression was resolute. Should they return, I'll make that abundantly clear, but be vigilant. Men like that don't always respect the law when it conflicts with their interests. Their business in town concluded. They stopped for a simple lunch at the hotel dining room before starting back to the ranch. Victoria felt simultaneously relieved and exhausted by the morning's activities. They had established her presence openly, exactly as Lucas had planned. The townspeople they'd encountered had been welcoming, seemingly accepting her at face value, yet the sheriff's warning lingered in her mind. $100 was an enormous sum, enough to tempt even decent people into betrayal. And her father wasn't likely to abandon his plans easily, especially with Harrison Whitmore's money backing him. As they traveled home, Victoria noticed Lucas watching her with concern. You're very quiet, he observed. She managed a smile. Just thinking. Thank you for today. You've gone to extraordinary lengths for my sake. Lucas's gaze returned to the road ahead. I told you before, sometimes kindness isn't meant to be repaid. Even so, Victoria persisted, you've risked much. If my father returns with men, if there's trouble, then we'll face it, Lucas said simply, as if the matter were already decided. Together. The word hung between them, carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. Victoria studied his profile, noting the determination in the set of his jaw, the unwavering focus in his blue eyes. In that moment, she realized that Lucas O'Connor was not merely being kind, he was making a choice to stand with her against whatever came. The revelation both warmed and troubled her heart. Warmed because his steadfast support meant more than she could express. Troubled because she feared what it might cost him in the end. As June ripened into July, life at O'Connor Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria's days were filled with household duties, cooking, cleaning, mending, interspersed with moments of unexpected joy. Lucas taught her to ride properly, not side saddle as she'd been raised, but astride like the ranch women of Colorado. He kept his promise to teach her to shoot as well, patient with her initial fear of the weapon. The gun itself isn't good or evil, he explained as they practiced behind the barn. It's merely a tool. What matters is the hand that holds it and the heart that guides the hand. Under his tutelage, Victoria became a fair shot, able to hit a can placed on a fence post at 20 paces. The knowledge that she could defend herself if necessary gave her a newfound confidence that extended beyond their shooting lessons. On Sundays, they attended church in Delta, Victoria sitting between Lucas and Walter in the family pew. Afterward, she would join the ladies of the congregation for quilting or charitable works, while the men discussed ranch business. She made friends cautiously, Martha Reynolds, the doctor's wife, Louisa Palmer, and a young widow named Rebecca Ames who ran the hotel dining room. Through these connections, Victoria began to hear whispers about her situation. The story of the men searching for a runaway daughter had circulated, embellished with each telling. Some versions painted her as an heiress fleeing an arranged marriage. Others suggested she had stolen family valuables before disappearing. Victoria neither confirmed nor denied these rumors, preferring to let her present conduct speak for itself. Lucas accompanied her everywhere in town, a protective shadow that attracted its own speculation. Rebecca Ames teased Victoria gently about her handsome guardian during one quilting session. "He watches you like a hawk," Rebecca observed. "Not that I blame him. You're a pretty young thing, and eligible men outnumber eligible women 10 to 1 in these parts." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that. Lucas is my employer, nothing more." Rebecca exchanged knowing glances with the other women. "If you say so, dear. But I haven't seen Lucas O'Connor attend church so regularly since his mother moved away. Something or someone has certainly captured his attention." Victoria changed the subject quickly, uncomfortable with the implication. Yet she couldn't deny that something had shifted between herself and Lucas in recent weeks. Their conversations lingered into the evening after Walter retired. Their hands occasionally brushed while working together, sending unexpected tingles up her arm. Sometimes she would look up to find his gaze on her, thoughtful and intense, before he quickly looked away. These moments both thrilled and frightened her. Lucas O'Connor was unlike any man she had known, honorable, gentle despite his strength, respectful of her opinions and abilities. If circumstances had been different, if she hadn't arrived at his door as a desperate fugitive. But circumstances were what they were. Victoria reminded herself that her position was precarious, her future uncertain. Even if Lucas felt something beyond kindness toward her, pursuing such feelings would only complicate an already complex situation. Better to maintain the boundaries of employer and employee, at least until she was truly free of her past. July gave way to August, bringing with it scorching days and the annual Delta Harvest Festival. The entire town prepared for 3 days of celebration, with competitions, dancing, and feasting to mark the end of summer. "You should attend," Lucas told Victoria as they sat on the porch one evening, watching heat lightning flicker over the distant mountains. "It would do you good to enjoy yourself for once." Victoria hesitated. "It seems frivolous when there's so much work to be done." "The work will wait," Lucas insisted. "Besides, Walter and I need to attend the livestock auction. Might as well make a proper outing of it." In truth, Victoria was eager to experience the festival. Her childhood had contained few celebrations, her father considering such events wasteful indulgences. The prospect of music, dancing, and carefree enjoyment was tempting indeed. "Very well," she agreed. "But I have nothing suitable to wear for dancing." Lucas smiled, clearly pleased by her acceptance. "I believe Martha Reynolds mentioned that her niece is visiting from Denver, similar in size to you if I recall. Perhaps she might loan you something appropriate." The morning of the festival dawned clear and hot. Lucas and Walter departed early for the livestock auction, leaving Victoria to finish her chores before joining them in town. She worked quickly, excitement building as she contemplated the day ahead. Just after noon, she saddled the gentle mare Lucas had assigned for her use and started for Delta. The road was busy with wagons and riders all headed to the festival, the atmosphere festive with anticipation. Martha Reynolds had indeed arranged for her niece's spare dress, a lovely creation of blue silk that complemented Victoria's chestnut hair beautifully. After changing in a back room of the general store, Victoria hardly recognized her reflection in Martha's looking glass. "My dear, you look absolutely transformed," Martha declared, adjusting the dress's lace collar. "Lucas O'Connor won't know what hit him." Victoria protested weakly, but Martha merely patted her hand with grandmotherly understanding. "I've seen how that young man looks at you, and how you look at him when you think no one notices. Life's too short to waste time denying what's in your heart." Before Victoria could formulate a response, Martha hurried her out to the town square where the festivities were in full swing. A platform had been erected for musicians. Bunting and flowers decorated every available surface, and tables groaned under the weight of potluck offerings. Victoria searched the crowd for Lucas, eventually spotting him near the livestock pens deep in conversation with several ranchers. He hadn't noticed her yet, giving her a moment to observe him unawares. He stood tall among the other men, his presence commanding without being overbearing. The summer sun had darkened his skin and lightened streaks in his dark hair. When he laughed at something one of the men said, the sound carried across the square, making Victoria smile in response. As if sensing her gaze, Lucas looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found her. For a moment, he simply stared, his conversation forgotten. Then he excused himself from the group and began making his way toward her, weaving through the throng with determined steps. "Victoria," he greeted her, his voice slightly breathless. "You look. That is, the dress is very becoming." "Thank you," she replied, inexplicably shy under his admiring gaze. "Martha's niece was kind enough to lend it to me." "I must remember to thank her," Lucas said, still looking at Victoria with something like wonder. "Would you care to walk with me? The judging for preserves is about to begin, and I hear Mrs. Palmer has entered her famous blackberry jam." They spent the afternoon wandering from one event to another, admiring handcrafts, sampling baked goods, watching children's races and men's feats of strength. Lucas introduced Victoria to numerous ranchers and their wives, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the square and the musicians took their places on the platform. The first strains of a waltz filled the air, and couples began to move toward the area designated for dancing. Lucas turned to Victoria, a question in his eyes. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. Victoria hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you I'm not very practiced at dancing." "Neither am I," Lucas admitted as he led her to the floor. "We can learn together." His arm encircled her waist, strong and secure, as his other hand clasped hers. Victoria rested her free hand on his shoulder, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath her fingers. They moved somewhat awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm as the music swelled around them. "You're doing wonderfully," Lucas murmured, guiding her through a turn. "You're an excellent teacher," Victoria replied, growing more confident with each step. They danced 3 consecutive dances, lost in their own world despite the crowded floor. During a particularly lively reel, Lucas lifted her by the waist in a twirl that left Victoria breathless with exhilaration. When he set her down, their faces were inches apart, his eyes dark with an emotion she dared not name. The moment was broken by Walter's appearance at their side. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should know," he said urgently. "Just overheard at the bar strangers arrived in town an hour ago, 4 men asking about a young woman matching Victoria's description." Lucas's expression hardened instantly. "Where are they now?" "Sheriff's keeping an eye on them at the Silver Dollar. They're offering $200 now for information leading to her." Victoria felt a chill despite the warm evening. "They've doubled the reward again." Lucas took her elbow, guiding her away from the dance floor. "We should leave before someone recognizes you in this crowd." Too late for that, Walter warned. Martha Reynolds's nephew was in the saloon when they were showing your picture around. He might have recognized you from your visits to the store. Victoria glanced around the festival, suddenly seeing potential threats in every curious glance. What do we do? Lucas thought quickly. We can't return to the ranch tonight. That's the first place they'll look if they get word of your whereabouts. Walter, can you create a diversion? Make it known you're heading back to the ranch alone. Draw them in that direction. Walter nodded grimly. I can manage that. Where will you two go? I have a hunting cabin about 15 miles north in the foothills. It's remote, hard to find unless you know where to look. Lucas turned to Victoria. It won't be comfortable like the ranch house, but it will be safe until we figure out our next move. I'll take safety over comfort, Victoria assured him. They formulated their plan quickly. Walter would return to the ranch openly, making sure he was observed leaving town. Meanwhile, Lucas and Victoria would slip away quietly, taking a roundabout route to the cabin to avoid being followed. The change from festive celebration to flight happened so swiftly that Victoria barely had time to process her emotions. One moment she had been dancing in Lucas's arms, her heart light with possibility. The next, she was back to being hunted, her presence endangering the very people who had shown her kindness. They left the festival grounds separately, Victoria first, changing quickly back into her everyday clothes in Martha's storeroom before slipping out the back door. Lucas met her at the livery stable where they saddled fresh horses, leaving Victoria's mare behind to avoid recognition. Night had fallen completely by the time they rode out of Delta, taking a little-used trail that led north into increasingly rugged terrain. They traveled in silence, alert for any sound that might indicate pursuit. The moon provided enough light to navigate, but Lucas still led them carefully, mindful of the treacherous footing. After nearly 3 hours of hard riding, they reached a densely wooded area where the trail all but disappeared. Lucas dismounted, helping Victoria down from her horse. "We'll walk from here," he whispered. "The cabin's about half a mile further, but there's no proper trail." They led the horses through the trees, the ground rising steadily beneath their feet. Eventually, they emerged in a small clearing where a rustic log cabin stood, barely visible in the moonlight. Lucas secured the horses while Victoria waited, her nerves stretched taut with exhaustion and fear. When he returned, he produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the cabin door. "It's not much," he warned as they stepped inside, "but it's solid and hidden." He struck a match, lighting a lantern that revealed a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough table with 2 chairs, and basic cooking implements hanging from hooks on the wall. A bearskin rug covered part of the plank floor, and firewood was stacked neatly beside the hearth. "It's perfect," Victoria said, meaning it despite the cabin's simplicity. In that moment, any shelter from pursuit seemed luxurious. Lucas built a small fire to take the chill from the night air. Victoria removed her shawl and sat on one of the chairs, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's dramatic shift. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice catching. "You've been nothing but kind, and I've brought this danger to your doorstep." Lucas knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Victoria, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, finding no reproach there, only steadfast determination. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "The men pursuing you, your father, this Whitmore, they are the ones who should be ashamed. Not you. Never you." A tear slipped down Victoria's cheek. "But Walter, your ranch, Walter is a crafty old fox who survived Apache raids and Confederate patrols. He can handle a few bullies." Lucas squeezed her hands gently. "As for the ranch, it's just land and buildings. Important, yes, but not worth sacrificing a person's freedom and happiness. Victoria studied his face in the flickering firelight, wondering at the man before her. Why, Lucas? Why risk so much for someone you barely knew? Lucas released her hand slowly, rising to add another log to the fire. For a long moment he stood with his back to her, shoulders tense with some internal struggle. When I was 16, he finally began, his voice low, my sister Margaret Maggie, we called her, fell in love with a young man from a neighboring ranch. Our father disapproved. The boy's family had Southern sympathies during the war, and Pa had fought for the Union. He forbade the relationship. He turned to face Victoria, his expression haunted by memory. Maggie defied him. She and her young man planned to elope to California. When Pa discovered their plan, he locked her in her room until she came to her senses. She escaped through a window, but in her haste she fell. Broke her leg badly. Victoria gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. The doctor said she'd never walk properly again, Lucas continued. Her young man couldn't face the prospect of a crippled wife. He left without her. That's terrible, Victoria whispered. Lucas nodded grimly. What was worse was watching what it did to Maggie, not the limp she adapted to that, but the spirit inside her dimmed. She became a shadow of herself, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. He sat in the chair opposite Victoria, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. When you told me about your father arranging your marriage, about being treated as property rather than a person with dreams and desires of your own, I saw Maggie in you. Except you were still fighting, still refusing to let them extinguish your spirit. Victoria reached across the small space between them, placing her hand on his arm. I'm so sorry about your sister. She's better now, Lucas said. Found her own way eventually. The man she married in San Francisco loves her for who she is, limp and all. He covered Victoria's hand with his own. But I promised myself years ago that if I ever encountered someone in a similar situation, someone being denied the right to choose their own path, I would help if I could. Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. That's why you pulled me from the river. Why you offered me shelter, employment. At first, yes, Lucas admitted. But now, he fell silent, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. Victoria's heart quickened at the unfinished thought hanging between them. Now, she prompted softly. Lucas looked up, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. Now I help you because I care what happens to you, Victoria Linfield. Because in these past months, you've become important to me in ways I never anticipated. The simple honesty of his words touched Victoria deeply. Without conscious thought, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them until her lips met his in a gentle kiss. Lucas remained still for a heartbeat, before responding, his hand rising to cradle her cheek as he returned the kiss with equal gentleness. When they parted, his expression was a mixture of wonder and concern. Victoria, he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, I don't want you to feel obligated in any way. She silenced him with a finger to his lips. Lucas O'Connor, do you truly believe I would kiss a man out of obligation? A smile tugged at his mouth beneath her finger. I suppose not. You're far too stubborn for that. Precisely. Victoria withdrew her hand, her own smile fading as reality reasserted itself. But we still face a difficult situation. My father won't give up easily, especially with Harrison Whitmore's money motivating him. Lucas nodded, once again the practical rancher. We have options. We could leave Colorado altogether, California, Oregon, even the Arizona territory. And abandon your ranch, everything you've built. Victoria shook her head. I won't let you make that sacrifice. Then we face them, Lucas said simply. Establish legally that you're acting of your own free will. Sheriff Holloway would support us. The territorial courts recognize a woman's right to determine her own future. Victoria considered this. A legal battle would be costly, drawn out, and Whitmore has connections, influence that could sway judges. They discussed possibilities late into the night, weighing each option carefully. Eventually, exhaustion overcame them. Lucas insisted Victoria take the cot, while he slept on the bearskin rug before the fire. As Victoria drifted toward sleep, wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smelled of pine and smoke, she found herself facing an unexpected truth. Somewhere between the river and this hidden cabin, between fear and hope, she had fallen in love with Lucas O'Connor. The realization should have terrified her, given their uncertain circumstances. Instead, it filled her with a strange, calm resolve. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light seeping through the cabin's single window. Victoria awoke to find Lucas already up, tending the fire and brewing coffee in a battered pot. "Good morning," he greeted her softly. "Sleep well." Victoria sat up, combing her fingers through her tangled hair. "Better than I expected. Any sign of trouble?" "None." Lucas poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "We're well hidden here. Few people even know this cabin exists." They shared a simple breakfast of jerky and hard biscuits from Lucas's saddlebags, discussing their next move in the clear light of morning. They decided to remain at the cabin for at least 2 days, giving Walter time to assess the situation in town and at the ranch. If they followed him back, they'll be watching the main house, Lucas reasoned. Walter will find a way to send word once it's safe to return. The enforced isolation of the cabin might have been awkward after the previous night's revelations, but instead, Victoria found a curious peace in the simple routine they established. They took turns tending the horses, gathering firewood, and preparing their meager meals. In between these tasks, they really talked about their lives, hopes and fears in a way they never had before. Lucas told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his father's dreams for the land and his own vision for its future. Victoria shared stories of her mother, who had taught her to read and sew before succumbing to pneumonia when Victoria was 12. After her death, Victoria's father had grown increasingly bitter and mercenary, viewing his children as assets rather than family. "My brothers learned from his example," she explained as they sat outside the cabin on the second afternoon, enjoying the mountain sunshine. "They became hard men, interested only in what could be gained, never what could be given." "And yet you remain different," Lucas observed. "How?" Victoria considered the question. "My mother's books, perhaps. She left me her small collection poetry, novels, even some philosophical works. Father thought reading a waste of time for women, but I read in secret. Those books showed me worlds beyond our homestead, ways of thinking beyond my father's narrow views." "You're remarkable," Lucas said simply. Victoria blushed under his admiring gaze. "Hardly. I merely refused to become what he wanted me to be, a commodity to be traded for advantage." "That takes more courage than most people possess," Lucas insisted. "Standing against family, against everything you've been taught to accept, that's remarkable, Victoria." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of a horse approaching. Instantly alert, Lucas reached for his rifle, motioning for Victoria to move behind the cabin. "Stay out of sight," he whispered. "I'll handle this." Victoria retreated as directed, her heart pounding as she listened to the approaching rider. Had they been discovered? Was it her father or one of her brothers? Or worse, men hired by Harrison Whitmore to retrieve his intended bride? The sound of Walter's distinctive whistle filtered through the trees, and Victoria sagged with relief. Lucas responded with a similar call, lowering his rifle as Walter's horse came into view. All clear, the old ranch hand announced as he dismounted. Though it was a close thing for a while, Victoria emerged from hiding as Lucas greeted Walter with a hearty slap on the shoulder. What happened? Walter accepted the cup of water Victoria offered, drinking deeply before answering. Your father and brothers followed me back to the ranch that night, just as we expected. Searched the place top to bottom while I pretended to cooperate. When they didn't find you, they got rough. Lucas's expression darkened at the bruise now visible on Walter's cheekbone. They hurt you. Walter waved off his concern. I've had worse from falling off horses. Besides, Sheriff Holloway arrived before they could get too enthusiastic with their questioning. Seems someone in town tipped him off that strangers were heading to your ranch with ill intent. Thank goodness, Victoria breathed. But how did you get away to come here? They've been watching the ranch, Walter explained. But their city men at heart don't know how to track worth a damn. I slipped out before dawn, took the long way around to throw off any followers. And now, Lucas asked, are they still at the ranch? Walter shook his head. Left yesterday. Word in town is they're heading back to Denver, at least temporarily. That Whitmore fellow apparently has business that can't wait, Victoria frowned. They wouldn't give up so easily. Oh, they haven't given up, Walter confirmed. Before they left, your father filed a formal complaint with the territorial court, claiming you're mentally unstable and that Lucas kidnapped you from their care. They're returning with legal papers and probably more men. Lucas cursed under his breath. How much time do we have? A week, maybe 2, Walter estimated. Depends on how quickly they can navigate the territorial bureaucracy. They returned to the ranch that afternoon, riding cautiously and taking a circuitous route to avoid any potential watchers. The main house appeared undisturbed from the outside, but inside bore evidence of the thorough search Walter had described: drawers left open, furniture moved, Victoria's few possessions scattered. They were looking for anything that might indicate where you'd gone, Walter explained as Victoria gathered her belongings. Or perhaps proof that you weren't here willingly. Lucas paced the main room, deep in thought. We need a plan before they return, legal representation at minimum. Delta's lawyer is hardly equipped to handle this sort of case, Walter pointed out. You'd need someone from Denver who understands territorial law regarding guardianship and women's rights. Then I'll go to Denver, Lucas decided. Tomorrow. Find a lawyer who can help us prepare for whatever legal challenge they bring. Victoria looked up sharply from folding her clothes. I should go with you. This concerns me more than anyone. Lucas shook his head. Too risky. Denver is Whitmore's territory. He has eyes and ears throughout the city. All the more reason I should testify in person, Victoria argued. Any legal defense will need my direct statement regarding my father's actions and my own state of mind. Their debate continued through dinner, with Walter offering occasional comments that supported both perspectives. Finally, as night fell, Lucas conceded the logic of Victoria's argument. You're right, he admitted reluctantly. Your testimony will carry more weight delivered in person, but we travel together, stay together at all times. No unnecessary risks. The journey to Denver required 2 days of hard travel. They left Walter in charge of the ranch, taking the best horses and traveling light. Lucas was tense throughout the journey, constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of threat. Victoria found his protectiveness both touching and occasionally frustrating. I'm not made of glass, Lucas, she reminded him during a brief rest stop. I survived 20 years with my father. I can handle a ride to Denver. It's not your strength I doubt, he replied, softening his concern with a smile. It's the lengths to which Whitmore might go to claim what he believes is his. Denver in 1878 was a bustling city of nearly 35,000 people, a far cry from the small mining camp it had been just 20 years earlier. Victoria had visited only once before, on a rare excursion with her mother before her death. The city had grown exponentially since then, with grand buildings of brick and stone replacing the wooden structures of its early days. They secured rooms at a modest hotel on the outskirts of town, far from the opulent Brown Palace where Whitmore and his associates would likely be found. Lucas registered them as brother and sister to avoid scandal, though the clerk's knowing look suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by the ruse. Their first task was to locate a reputable attorney. The hotel proprietor recommended William Blackwell, a former judge who had established a legal practice specializing in territorial disputes and family law. They found Blackwell's office on a tree-lined street of professional establishments. The lawyer himself was a surprisingly young man, not yet 40, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a thoughtful manner that put Victoria immediately at ease. After hearing their situation, Blackwell leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. "You've presented me with an interesting case, Miss Linfield. Legally speaking, you're within your rights as an adult woman to determine your own residence and associations. However, allegations of mental instability can complicate matters significantly." "Those allegations are completely false," Victoria asserted. "My father is motivated purely by financial considerations. Harrison Whitmore offered him a substantial sum for my hand in marriage." Blackwell nodded. "Such arrangements, while morally questionable, aren't technically illegal. But forcing an unwilling adult into marriage certainly is." He turned to Lucas. "Your involvement complicates matters further, Mr. O'Connor. They may claim you've exerted undue influence over Miss Linfield for your own purposes." Lucas stiffened. "My only purpose was to help someone in need." "A noble motive," Blackwell acknowledged, "but one that may be difficult to prove in court against determined opposition. Whitmore is a powerful man with connections throughout the territory." "What do you suggest?" Victoria asked. Blackwell considered for a moment. "We need to establish clearly that you're of sound mind and acting of your own free will. Testimonials from respected members of the Delta community would help. Medical examination by an impartial physician to refute claims of instability. And most importantly, a clear demonstration that your rejection of this arranged marriage predates your association with Mr. O'Connor." "How do we demonstrate that?" Lucas asked. "Were there witnesses to previous attempts to refuse the match?" "Anyone your father might have confided in about your reluctance," Victoria thought carefully. "Our neighbor, Mrs. Hollister. She visited the day before I fled. I overheard my father telling her about the arrangement with Whitmore, complaining about my stubbornness in refusing such a generous offer." Blackwell made a note. "Good. We'll need her testimony. Anyone else?" "The local preacher who was to perform the ceremony," Victoria recalled. "Reverend Simmons. He came to counsel me about my duty to honor my father's wishes. I told him quite clearly that I would rather die than marry Harrison Whitmore." "Excellent," Blackwell said, writing rapidly. "Religious figures make compelling witnesses. Their testimony carries particular weight with judges." For the next hour, they developed their legal strategy. Blackwell would prepare documents establishing Victoria's mental competence and right to self-determination. They would gather affidavits from Delta residents testifying to her sound character and clear thinking. And they would file a counter-complaint alleging attempted forced marriage, which violated territorial statutes. "One more thing," Blackwell said as they prepared to leave. You should consider the possibility that Whitmore won't rely solely on legal means to achieve his goal. Men of his type often believe themselves above the law. Lucas nodded grimly. We've considered that possibility. Then be vigilant during your stay in Denver. Whitmore has many employees who wouldn't hesitate to take matters into their own hands if properly compensated. They left Blackwell's office with a plan in place, but heightened awareness of their vulnerability in the city. Lucas insisted they return directly to their hotel, avoiding public places where they might be recognized. As they walked, Victoria noticed Lucas scanning the crowds constantly, his hand never far from the pistol concealed beneath his coat. Despite the summer heat, she felt a chill of apprehension. Denver suddenly seemed full of potential threats, every passing glance potentially hostile. We'll leave first thing tomorrow, Lucas decided as they reached the hotel. Blackwell has what he needs from us for now. The sooner we return to Delta, the safer we'll be. Victoria agreed, though part of her hated retreating so quickly. It felt like running away, like allowing fear to dictate their actions. Yet she understood the pragmatic wisdom in Lucas's caution. They dined privately in Victoria's room, discussing Blackwell's strategy and their own next steps. As evening deepened into night, Lucas rose reluctantly to retire to his own room across the hall. "Lock your door," he instructed. "Don't open it for anyone but me, and only if I give our signal." They had established a distinctive knock, 2 quick taps, followed by 3 slower ones to identify themselves. Victoria promised to follow his instructions. After securing her door, she prepared for bed, her mind churning with the day's developments. Sleep proved elusive as she imagined the legal battle ahead, the public scrutiny, the potential for violence if Whitmore decided to circumvent the law. A noise in the hallway startled her fully awake. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving stealthily past her door. Then Lucas's distinctive knock at her door, 2 quick, 3 slow. Victoria rose quickly, pulling on her robe before unlocking the door. Lucas stood there, fully dressed despite the late hour, a finger to his lips warning her to silence. "We need to leave," he whispered. "Now. What's happened?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice low. "Men watching the hotel," Lucas explained tersely. "Walter's friend at the livery recognized one of them works for Whitmore's mining operation. They know we're here." Victoria moved quickly, changing into her traveling clothes while Lucas turned discreetly away. She packed her few belongings into her satchel, heart racing with renewed fear. "Ready," she announced moments later. Lucas led her to the window rather than the door. "There's a service stairway outside. We can reach the alley without being seen." The descent was precarious but manageable. Once in the alley, they moved quickly through the sleeping city, staying to shadows and avoiding the main streets. Lucas led them to a different livery stable where their horses waited, already saddled. "Walter's friend," Lucas explained as they mounted. "He got word to us just in time." They rode out of Denver under cover of darkness, taking a different route than their arrival. By dawn, they were well into the foothills, beyond immediate pursuit. They stopped only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold breakfast from their saddlebags. "Blackwell will continue with our legal preparations," Lucas assured her as they rode, "but we need to be more careful now. They know we're actively fighting back." Victoria nodded, too exhausted for lengthy conversation. The night's hasty escape had drained her remaining energy, leaving only determination to keep moving forward. They reached Delta 2 days later, having pushed themselves and their horses hard to outpace any potential pursuit. Walter greeted them with obvious relief, having received word of the Denver situation through his network of friends. "Thought you might not make it back," he admitted. Word is Whitmore's offered $500 for information on your whereabouts now. The escalating reward confirmed the mining magnate's determination. $500 was a fortune in the territory, enough to tempt even honest men into betrayal. For the next week, they lived in a state of constant vigilance. Lucas arranged for trusted ranch hands to patrol the property boundaries. Victoria never ventured beyond the immediate vicinity of the house. Walter made trips to town for supplies and information, reporting that rumors of the situation had spread throughout Delta and beyond. "Most folks are on your side," he told Victoria after one such trip. "Particularly the women. Seems the story of a young woman fleeing forced marriage to a wealthy older man has captured their imaginations." This unexpected support was heartening, but it didn't diminish the very real threat they faced. Blackwell sent regular updates via telegraph, legal preparations proceeding well, affidavits gathered from several Delta residents, a court date set for the following month. "A month," Victoria said when Lucas shared this news. "Can we maintain this state of siege for that long?" Lucas took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "We can do whatever we must. The important thing is that we have a fighting chance now. The law may yet provide the protection you need." Victoria wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. Harrison Whitmore had not accumulated his fortune by accepting defeat gracefully. Her father's stubborn pride wouldn't allow him to simply walk away from his planned arrangement. The longer they waited for legal resolution, the more opportunity their opponents had to find alternative methods to achieve their goals. Her fears proved prophetic 3 days later, when Walter returned from town with alarming news. "Whitmore's men are in Delta," he reported grimly. "Not just one or two, a dozen at least. They're staying at the hotel, asking questions all over town." Lucas's expression hardened. "What kind of men?" "The kind that wear their guns low and know how to use them," Walter said. "Not miners or clerks' hired guns." That night, they extinguished the lamps early, maintaining the pretense of normal routine while preparing for possible attack. Lucas distributed weapons throughout the house, his rifle by the front door, shotgun in the kitchen, pistols within easy reach in every room. Victoria found herself stationed at an upstairs window with Lucas's pearl-handled revolver, watching the approach to the ranch house. The weight of the weapon in her hand was both reassuring and terrifying. Could she actually fire it at another human being if necessary? The answer came with surprising certainty. Yes, if it meant protecting her freedom and the people who had risked everything to help her. The attack, when it came, was not the frontal assault they had anticipated. Near midnight, the distinctive smell of smoke roused Victoria from her vigilant watch. Looking out the window, she saw flames licking at the corner of the barn, deliberately set and quickly spreading in the dry summer air. "Fire," she called downstairs. "The barn's burning." Lucas and Walter rushed outside, Victoria close behind despite Lucas's instruction to stay in the house. The animals inside were panicking, their frightened sounds carrying clearly through the night air. "We have to get the horses out," Lucas shouted, running toward the burning structure. Victoria knew immediately it was a diversion. "Lucas, wait! It's a trap!" Her warning came too late. As Lucas and Walter focused on the barn door, dark figures emerged from the shadows surrounding the house. Victoria counted 6 men, all armed, moving with practiced coordination. "Lucas!" She screamed again as 2 men rushed him from behind. Lucas spun at her cry, drawing his pistol in a fluid motion, but another attacker struck from his blind side. The blow sent him staggering, his gun falling from his grasp. Walter fared no better, an attacker's rifle butt connecting with his temple and dropping him unconscious to the ground. Victoria raised her revolver, but hesitated. The men were too close to Lucas, the risk of hitting him too great. Her moment of indecision proved costly. Rough hands seized her from behind, a cloth pressed over her mouth and nose. The sickly sweet smell of chloroform filled her senses as she struggled against the inexorable pull of unconsciousness. Her last sight before darkness claimed her was Lucas fighting desperately against 3 attackers, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. His expression one of fury and anguish as he watched her being dragged away. Victoria awoke to the rhythmic sway of a moving wagon, her head pounding and her mouth painfully dry. She lay on a rough wooden surface, hands bound before her, a canvas tarp partially covering her body. Through a gap in the covering, she could see stars wheeling overhead, providing the only light in the otherwise pitch-black night. Gathering her wits, she tried to assess her situation. The wagon was moving fast, the driver pushing the team hard, judging by their labored breathing. 2 men rode alongside. She could hear their occasional comments to each other, though the words were indistinct over the rattle of wheels. Her abductors, undoubtedly Whitmore's men, were taking her. Where? Back to her father. Directly to Whitmore himself. The possibilities were equally disturbing. Carefully, trying to avoid drawing attention, Victoria tested her bonds. The rope around her wrists was tight but not painfully so, secured by someone who knew their business. Her ankles were similarly bound, preventing any attempt to escape the moving wagon. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Victoria fought it back with determined focus. Lucas and Walter, were they alive? Injured? The not knowing was almost worse than her own predicament. Had the ranch house burned along with the barn? Had their entire life been destroyed in a single night of violence? The thought of Lucas, bloodied and desperate, fighting against impossible odds, brought tears to her eyes. In the weeks since he had pulled her from the river, he had become more than her rescuer, more than a friend or even a potential suitor. He had become the embodiment of everything she valued: courage, integrity, gentleness combined with strength. If he had died trying to protect her? No. She couldn't allow herself to follow that line of thinking. Lucas was alive. He had to be. And he would be looking for her, of that she was certain. The wagon continued through the night, taking roads less traveled, judging by the rough terrain. Victoria estimated they had been moving for at least 5 hours when the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon. Shortly thereafter, the wagon slowed, turning onto what felt like a private drive. Victoria closed her eyes, pretending unconsciousness as the wagon came to a complete stop. Male voices surrounded the vehicle, one giving orders to the others. Get her inside. The boss wants to see her as soon as she's presentable. Rough hands pulled her from the wagon, carrying her into a building. Through slitted eyes, Victoria glimpsed a substantial stone house, not a ranch dwelling, but something more refined, with manicured grounds visible in the growing light. She was taken to a bedroom on the 2nd floor and placed on a bed. When the door closed behind her captors, Victoria opened her eyes fully, surveying her surroundings. The room was luxuriously appointed with quality furniture, expensive draperies, and a thick carpet. A prison, but a gilded one. Testing her bonds again, Victoria found them as secure as before. She was contemplating her limited options when the door opened to admit a woman middle-aged, plainly dressed, with a severe expression that softened slightly when she saw Victoria's bound hands. "That won't be necessary now," she said, producing a small knife from her pocket. She cut the ropes binding Victoria's wrists and ankles, her touch impersonal but not unkind. "I'm Mrs. Graves, the housekeeper. Mr. Whitmore instructed me to help you prepare for breakfast." Victoria rubbed her wrists, wincing at the tender skin where the rope had chafed. "Where am I?" Mr. Whitmore's country estate, the housekeeper replied, about 20 miles outside Denver. And my companions, the men at the ranch, do you know what happened to them? Mrs. Graves's expression revealed nothing. I know only that you're expected downstairs within the hour. There's water for washing and appropriate clothing in the wardrobe. With that, she exited, closing the door firmly behind her. Victoria heard the distinctive click of a key turning in the lock. No pretense, then she was a prisoner here, regardless of the comfortable surroundings. Left alone, Victoria explored the room, searching for potential weapons or means of escape. The windows were latched but not barred, opening onto a steep drop to a stone courtyard below. The wardrobe contained several dresses, all in her size or close to it, suggesting Whitmore had planned this abduction with disturbing thoroughness. Finding no immediate means of escape, Victoria decided to comply outwardly while looking for opportunities. She washed quickly with the provided water, then selected the simplest of the dresses, a morning gown of pale blue cotton, modest in design if expensive in materials. When Mrs. Graves returned, she looked Victoria over with professional assessment. "You'll do. Mr. Whitmore awaits you in the breakfast room." Victoria was escorted downstairs through a grand entrance hall, decorated with paintings and sculptures that spoke of considerable wealth. The breakfast room proved to be a sunny chamber overlooking formal gardens, set with fine china and crystal that gleamed in the morning light. Harrison Whitmore rose as she entered, a tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked dark hair and cold gray eyes. At 53, he maintained the physique of a younger man, his tailored clothing emphasizing broad shoulders and a trim waist. He might have been considered handsome but for the calculating assessment in his gaze as it traveled over Victoria. "Miss Linfield," he greeted her with a slight bow. "At last we meet properly. Please be seated." Victoria remained standing, her chin lifted in defiance. "I prefer to stand, Mr. Whitmore. I don't break bread with men who abduct women from their homes." Whitmore's smile never reached his eyes. "I believe you'll find that you were residing unlawfully on O'Connor property, having been lured there under false pretenses. My men merely returned you to the protection of your lawful guardian, myself, as your betrothed." "You are not my betrothed," Victoria stated flatly. "I never consented to any arrangement between you and my father." "Your consent is immaterial," Whitmore replied, his tone still pleasant though his expression hardened. "Your father accepted my suit on your behalf, as is his right. The contract is binding." "Not in territorial law," Victoria countered. "Adult women cannot be contracted into marriage without their consent." Whitmore's eyebrow rose slightly. "I see O'Connor's lawyer has been filling your head with legal theories. How unfortunate that the courts rarely uphold such progressive interpretations when faced with the reality of family authority." He gestured again to the chair opposite his own. "Now, please sit. There's no need for this discussion to be uncomfortable." Recognizing that continued defiance would gain her nothing at this point, Victoria sat stiffly, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Graves but refusing the offered plate of food. "Where is my father?" she asked. "I'm surprised he isn't here to deliver me personally into your custody." "Gerald is attending to business matters in Denver," Whitmore explained smoothly. "He'll join us this evening for dinner, at which time we'll discuss the wedding arrangements." Victoria set down her cup with deliberate care. "There will be no wedding, Mr. Whitmore. I won't consent, and without my consent, any ceremony would be invalid." Whitmore studied her with something like admiration. "You have spirit, Victoria. I appreciate that quality in a woman in moderation, but you should understand your situation clearly. Your father's debts are considerable. Without my intervention, he would lose everything. Your brothers would be reduced to common laborers. The Linfield name would be disgraced throughout the territory. My father's financial mismanagement is not my responsibility, Victoria replied, nor are my brothers' futures. Family obligations extend beyond personal preference, Whitmore countered, but perhaps you need time to consider matters more carefully. He rose from the table. You'll remain here as my guest until the wedding. I suggest you use this time to reconcile yourself to your future. Fighting against inevitability only leads to unnecessary suffering. With that, he left the room, leaving Victoria alone with Mrs. Graves, who began clearing the barely touched breakfast dishes. He's had 3 wives before me, Victoria said quietly. What happened to them? The housekeeper paused, her expression unreadable. That's not for me to discuss, miss. Please, Victoria pressed. I have a right to know what awaits me if I can't escape this marriage. Mrs. Graves glanced toward the door before answering in a near whisper. The first died in childbirth. The second fell from a horse, broke her neck. The third, she hesitated. The third took ill suddenly. Doctors couldn't explain it. She just wasted away over a matter of months. A chill ran down Victoria's spine at the housekeeper's words. He murdered them, she whispered. I didn't say that, Mrs. Graves replied sharply, though her eyes held a warning. Accidents happen. Illness strikes the young as well as the old. Mr. Whitmore mourned each loss deeply. But her tone conveyed doubt, suggesting she had witnessed things that contradicted the official narratives of the previous Mrs. Whitmore's deaths. Help me, Victoria implored. Please, I don't want to die here, Mrs. Graves's expression softened momentarily before hardening again into professional detachment. I can't help you, miss. I have my own family to consider, children who depend on my wages. With that, she gathered the remaining dishes and left, the door locking behind her. Victoria spent the day confined to her room, permitted only brief excursions to a small sitting room under guard. She used the time to examine every aspect of her prison, searching for weaknesses in security, potential allies among the household staff, anything that might aid her escape. The windows, she confirmed, were too high for safe descent without equipment. The locks on the doors were substantial. The few servants she encountered seemed wary of engaging with her beyond the most basic interactions. As evening approached, Mrs. Graves returned with a formal dinner dress, deep burgundy silk with black lace trim, far more revealing than Victoria would have chosen for herself. The housekeeper helped her dress, arranging her hair in an elaborate style that emphasized her youth and delicate features. You look lovely, miss, Mrs. Graves commented as Victoria studied her reflection. The color suits you. Victoria met the older woman's eyes in the mirror, dressed like a lamb for slaughter, Mrs. Graves's hands stilled in their adjustments of the dress. Mr. Whitmore appreciates beauty. It would be wise to please him in small matters, even if you resist in larger ones. The advice, though pragmatic, filled Victoria with dread. Mrs. Graves was suggesting a strategy of survival rather than escape, as if Victoria's fate were already sealed. Dinner proved to be the ordeal Victoria had anticipated. Her father was indeed present, seated at Whitmore's right hand, looking uncomfortable in formal attire but clearly pleased with the arrangements. Victoria, he greeted her with a nod that contained no warmth. I trust you've recovered from your episode of confusion. I was never confused, father, Victoria replied evenly, merely unwilling to be sold to the highest bidder. Gerald Linfield's face darkened with anger. Mind your tongue, girl. Mr. Whitmore has been more than generous, considering your disgraceful behavior. Indeed, Whitmore interjected smoothly. Let's put the unpleasantness behind us. We have a future to discuss. Throughout the elaborate meal, Victoria maintained a facade of calm as the men discussed her future as if she weren't present. The wedding would take place in 2 weeks at Whitmore's Denver mansion. Her father would give her away, of course. Her brothers would stand as witnesses. Selected business associates and their wives would attend, making it a social event of the season. "And what of Lucas O'Connor?" Victoria asked during a lull in their planning. "What happened to him after your men attacked his ranch?" Her father and Whitmore exchanged glances before the latter answered. "O'Connor sustained injuries while interfering with my men's lawful retrieval of you. Nothing fatal, I'm told, though his ranch suffered considerable damage in the unfortunate fire." Relief flooded Victoria at the confirmation that Lucas lived, tempered by concern for his injuries and the damage to his property. "He'll come for me," she said with quiet certainty. "He won't abandon me to this fate." Whitmore's laugh held genuine amusement. "My dear, O'Connor is a minor rancher with limited resources and no significant connections. Even if he were foolish enough to attempt some romantic rescue, my men would ensure he never reached the front gate." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of tension and veiled threats. When finally excused, Victoria returned to her room feeling both exhausted and oddly energized. Lucas was alive. Whatever his injuries, whatever damage his ranch had sustained, he lived. And if he lived, he would indeed come for her, of that she had absolute faith. For the next 3 days, Victoria played a careful game of apparent compliance, while seeking every opportunity to gather information or potential means of escape. She accepted the fine clothing provided, ate the elaborate meals served, and endured Whitmore's increasingly possessive attention during carefully supervised encounters. All the while, she observed the household routines, noted which servants might be sympathetic to her plight, and mentally mapped the estate's layout during her limited movements within it. On the 4th day, her vigilance was rewarded with an unexpected opportunity. A young maid named Jenny, who had shown small kindnesses during her daily cleaning duties, entered Victoria's room with fresh linens and a barely perceptible nod toward the window. When the girl approached to make the bed, she whispered, "There's a man been watching the house from the woods. Tall, dark-haired, injured looks like, asked me about you when I was gathering herbs this morning." Victoria's heart leapt. "Lucas," she breathed. "Did you tell anyone else?" Jenny shook her head. "Cook says I talk too much as it is. Nobody listens to me anyway." "Good." Victoria lowered her voice further. "If you see him again, tell him I'm being moved to Denver in 3 days for the wedding. Whitmore's Denver mansion on Palmer Street." Jenny nodded slightly as she continued her work. "He said to tell you he hasn't forgotten his promise, whatever that means." Promise. The word echoed in Victoria's mind, recalling Lucas's vow that she would never be forced to marry against her will, that he would protect her freedom whatever the cost. That night, Victoria could barely sleep, hope and fear warring within her. Lucas was near, planning something despite his injuries. But Whitmore's estate was well guarded, and the mining magnate's resources vastly outmatched those of a single determined rancher. The next day brought an unexpected development. Whitmore announced over breakfast that their departure for Denver would be moved forward. "We leave tomorrow," he informed Victoria. "My business associates have arranged a reception in our honor the following evening. It would be impolite to miss it." Victoria maintained her composure with effort. "So soon? I thought we weren't departing until the day after next." "Plans change," Whitmore replied, studying her reaction with shrewd eyes. "I find it best to remain flexible in my arrangements, less opportunity for disruption that way." His emphasis made it clear he suspected something. Had he discovered Lucas's presence near the estate? Had someone overheard her whispered exchange with Jenny? Victoria spent the day in a state of carefully concealed panic, trying to devise a way to get word to Lucas about the change in plans. But Jenny didn't appear for her usual cleaning duties, and when Victoria inquired casually about her absence, Mrs. Graves informed her that the girl had been reassigned to the laundry. A deliberate separation, then. Whitmore was taking no chances. That evening, as Victoria prepared for her last night at the estate, a soft knock at her door heralded Mrs. Graves's arrival with a sleeping draft. "Mr. Whitmore suggests this will help you rest before our journey," the housekeeper explained, placing the small vial on the bedside table. "The road to Denver can be taxing." Victoria eyed the vial suspiciously. "I don't require medication to sleep, Mrs. Graves." "Nevertheless, Mr. Whitmore insists he'll check personally that you've taken it." After the housekeeper departed, Victoria lifted the vial, contemplating its contents. The liquid inside was clear. Odorless, it could be a simple sleeping draught as claimed, or something more sinister. Either way, she had no intention of drinking it. When Whitmore himself appeared an hour later to verify she had taken the medicine, Victoria presented a convincing performance of drowsiness, the empty vial visible on her nightstand. In reality, she had emptied it into a potted plant, hoping the dose wouldn't kill the unfortunate greenery. "Rest well, my dear," Whitmore said, his cold eyes assessing her seemingly drugged state. "Tomorrow begins our new life together." Victoria maintained her act until the door closed and the key turned in the lock. Then she rose swiftly, discarding her nightgown in favor of the simplest day dress she possessed. If opportunity for escape presented itself, she wanted to be prepared. Hours passed. The house grew quiet as servants completed their duties and retired. Victoria positioned herself near the window, watching for any movement in the darkness outside, any sign that Lucas might attempt a rescue before her departure for Denver. Midnight came and went. Victoria fought against despair, reminding herself that Lucas might not know of the accelerated timetable. He would be planning for the original departure date, unaware that Whitmore had changed his arrangements. Just as exhaustion began to overcome her vigilance, a soft scraping sound at her door captured Victoria's attention. The lock was being manipulated from the outside, the mechanism protesting quietly as someone worked at it with what sounded like metal picks. Victoria held her breath, moving silently to position herself behind the door. It could be Whitmore, coming to verify her drugged state or worse, or it could be rescue. The lock finally gave way with a soft click. The door opened slowly, revealing not Lucas's tall form but the slight figure of Jenny the maid, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Quickly," Jenny whispered. "The night watchman will make his rounds in 10 minutes." Victoria didn't waste time with questions, following the girl into the darkened hallway. Jenny led her through servants' passages and back stairways, avoiding the main areas where guards might be posted. "Your friend," Jenny explained in a breathless whisper as they descended a narrow staircase. "He found me in the laundry. Said to get you out through the kitchen garden if I could. He's waiting with horses by the south wood." They reached the kitchen level, moving silently past storerooms and the main cooking area. Jenny paused at a small door that Victoria guessed led to the garden mentioned. "The grounds are patrolled," Jenny warned, "but the men stick to the main paths. If you stay in the shadows along the hedge line, you should reach the woods unseen." Victoria gripped the girl's hand gratefully. "Why are you risking this for me?" Jenny's expression hardened. "My sister was Mr. Whitmore's second wife, the one who fell from a horse. She was terrified of horses, never would have ridden one willingly, but nobody questioned his story." The revelation stunned Victoria. "I'm so sorry." "Just go," Jenny urged. Live the life Catherine never got to have. With a final squeeze of the girl's hand, Victoria slipped through the door into the night air. The kitchen garden was illuminated only by moonlight, the herbs and vegetables casting strange shadows across the pathways. Following Jenny's instructions, Victoria kept to the shadows along a tall hedge, moving as quickly as she dared toward the distant tree line. Twice she froze as guards passed nearby, their lanterns swinging in lazy arcs as they patrolled the formal gardens. The distance to the woods seemed to stretch endlessly, each step a potential disaster if she were spotted. But determination drove her forward. Freedom lay ahead not just from this estate, but from the fate her father and Whitmore had planned for her. After what seemed an eternity, Victoria reached the edge of the woods. She paused, uncertain which direction to take when a low whistle sounded from her left. Turning, she saw Lucas emerging from the deeper shadows, leading 2 horses. "Victoria," he breathed, reaching for her with his free arm. She went to him without hesitation, relief overwhelming her as his familiar strength enfolded her. "Lucas, you came. I promised, didn't I?" His voice was rough with emotion as he held her tightly against him. When they separated, Victoria noted the bandage visible beneath his hat, the careful way he favored his left side. "You're hurt." "Nothing that won't heal," he assured her. "Walter got the worst of it, concussion that had him seeing double for days, but he's recovering well." "The ranch?" Victoria asked, dreading the answer. "Barn's gone, along with 2 good horses we couldn't get out in time. House survived with minimal damage. Lucas helped her mount one of the horses, but none of that matters now. We need to put distance between us and Whitmore before they discover you're missing." They rode hard through the night, following game trails and forgotten paths rather than main roads. Lucas clearly knew the terrain well, navigating confidently despite the darkness. "Where are we going?" Victoria asked during a brief rest to water the horses. "Not back to Delta, at least not immediately," Lucas replied. "Whitmore will send men there first. We're heading to Pueblo, where Blackwell has arranged a meeting with a territorial judge. With your direct testimony about the abduction and forced marriage attempt, we can obtain legal protection." The remainder of the night and the following day passed in a blur of hard riding and brief rests. They avoided towns and major roads, taking shelter in abandoned mining shacks or makeshift camps. Despite the circumstances, despite the danger still pursuing them, Victoria found herself treasuring these moments alone with Lucas, away from the watchful eyes of society. During one such rest, as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack beside a small creek, Victoria finally asked the question that had lingered since her rescue. "What happens after Pueblo, Lucas? After we secure legal protection?" Lucas set aside his tin cup, his expression serious as he considered her question. "That depends on what you want, Victoria. The ranch will always have a place for you, whether as housekeeper or—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Or in another capacity if you were so inclined." Victoria's heart quickened at the implication in his words. "What other capacity did you have in mind, Mr. O'Connor?" A slow smile spread across Lucas's face as he moved to sit beside her. "Well, Miss Linfield, Walter has been mentioning rather pointedly that the ranch needs a mistress. Someone to transform it from a bachelor establishment into a proper home." "Has he indeed?" Victoria tried and failed to suppress her own smile. "And you agree with this assessment?" "Wholeheartedly." Lucas took her hand in his expression growing earnest. "I know our acquaintance has been unusual from the start. I know there are men with more wealth, more refinement to offer you. But I don't believe there's a man alive who could cherish you more than I would, if given the chance." Victoria's free hand rose to touch his cheek, feeling the roughness of day-old stubble beneath her fingers. "Lucas O'Connor, are you proposing marriage to me while we're fugitives from Harrison Whitmore's men?" "I suppose I am," he admitted with a rueful laugh. "Not the romantic setting I might have planned, but then, nothing about us has followed conventional paths." "No," Victoria agreed softly. "From the moment you pulled me from that river, we've been writing our own story." Lucas's hand covered hers where it rested against his cheek. "Is it a story you wish to continue, Victoria?" With me, the answer required no thought, no weighing of options or considerations of practicality. It rose from her heart with absolute certainty. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The kiss they shared beside that quiet creek was tender yet passionate, a promise of the future they would build together once their present dangers were overcome. Pueblo, when they reached it the following day, offered temporary sanctuary. Blackwell had indeed arranged a meeting with Judge Harold Montgomery, a distinguished jurist known for his progressive views on women's rights and his intolerance for coercion in any form. In the judge's private chambers, Victoria provided a detailed account of her father's arrangement with Whitmore, her escape, Lucas's assistance, and the subsequent abduction from O'Connor Ranch. The judge listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly grave as her story unfolded. "This is a serious matter, Miss Linfield," he said when she had finished. "Attempted forced marriage, abduction, assault, these are criminal offenses, regardless of Mr. Whitmore's standing in territorial society." "Will you help us, Your Honor?" Lucas asked. Judge Montgomery nodded firmly. "I will issue an immediate injunction preventing Gerald Linfield from exercising any guardianship rights over his adult daughter. Additionally, I'll authorize a warrant for Harrison Whitmore's arrest on charges of kidnapping and assault." Relief flooded Victoria at these words, though practicality tempered her optimism. "Whitmore has powerful friends, Your Honor. Will a warrant be enough to stop him?" "Perhaps not immediately," the judge conceded, "but it begins the process of legal accountability. No man, regardless of his wealth or connections, stands entirely above the law in this territory." The judge's clerk prepared the necessary documents while they waited, the official seals and signatures transforming their personal struggle into a matter of territorial justice. "What happens now?" Victoria asked as they left the courthouse, the precious injunction secured in Lucas's inside pocket. "Now we return to Delta," Lucas decided. "With these papers, you have legal protection. Sheriff Holloway will enforce the judge's orders and the community will stand with us. Whitmore may be powerful in Denver, but Delta is our territory." The journey back to Delta took 3 days, their pace more measured now that they had legal documentation supporting Victoria's freedom to choose her own path. They traveled more openly, staying at reputable inns along the way, presenting themselves as the engaged couple they now were. News traveled faster than they did. By the time they reached Delta, the town was abuzz with their story, embellished in the telling but accurate in its essential details. Sheriff Holloway met them at the town limits, escorting them personally to the ranch where Walter waited with a hero's welcome. "Thought you two might never make it back," the old ranch hand grumbled, though his eyes shone with unmistakable relief. "Place has gone to pieces without proper supervision." In truth, the ranch was recovering well from the attack. The community had rallied around one of their own, neighbors helping to clear debris and begin rebuilding the barn. Lucas's cattle and remaining horses had been tended by volunteers, and the house itself showed little evidence of the violence that had occurred. Over the next weeks, as summer gave way to early autumn, a new normalcy established itself at O'Connor Ranch. Victoria continued her duties as housekeeper, but with the altered status of future mistress of the property. Lucas divided his time between ranch work and legal matters, coordinating with Blackwell to ensure the charges against Whitmore proceeded through the territorial courts. News from Denver was both encouraging and concerning. Whitmore had indeed been served with the arrest warrant, but had posted an enormous bond for his release pending trial. Victoria's father and brothers had retreated to their homestead, apparently abandoning any immediate plans to reclaim her. "They won't give up easily," Lucas warned one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Men like Whitmore consider legal obstacles merely temporary inconveniences." "I know," Victoria acknowledged, "but we have something they don't." "What's that?" She smiled, taking his hand in hers. "A community that stands with us, friends willing to help, and each other." Lucas raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Speaking of community," Reverend Matthews asked when we might schedule the wedding. "Seems the ladies of the church are eager to begin preparations." Victoria laughed. "I suspect Martha Reynolds has already ordered fabric for a wedding dress." "Would October be too soon?" Lucas asked, suddenly serious. "I know proper engagements typically last longer, but given the circumstances—" "October would be perfect," Victoria assured him. "I have no desire for a lengthy engagement when we already know our minds and hearts." The wedding plans proceeded with enthusiasm from the entire community. Martha Reynolds did indeed have fabric and patterns already selected, enlisting the ladies of the church to help create a wedding dress worthy of what many were calling the most romantic story in Delta history. Security remained a concern, with Lucas arranging for trusted men to patrol the ranch boundaries and Sheriff Holloway making frequent visits to check on their welfare. But as weeks passed without incident, they allowed themselves to hope that perhaps Whitmore had decided to await the legal process rather than risk further criminal charges. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons, the aspen trees turning brilliant yellow against the evergreen backdrop of the mountains. The barn rebuilding was completed just in time, its fresh timber gleaming in the autumn sunlight, decorated with harvest garlands for the wedding celebration to follow the church ceremony. The night before the wedding, Victoria stood in her room soon to be vacated for the master bedroom she would share with Lucas, contemplating the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had thrown herself into the Gunnison River, preferring death to a life without choice or love. Tomorrow, she would pledge herself willingly to a man who had proven his worth through actions rather than wealth or position. A soft knock interrupted her reflections. Opening the door, she found Lucas standing there, something concealed behind his back. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," she teased. "Only after midnight," he countered with a smile. "And I wanted to give you something privately before tomorrow's festivities." From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns of river currents and mountain peaks. "I made this," he explained somewhat self-consciously. "Walter says my woodworking needs practice, but—" Victoria took the box reverently, tracing the detailed carvings with her fingertips. "It's beautiful, Lucas. Open it," he encouraged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a gold locket on a delicate chain. Victoria lifted it carefully, opening the hinged oval to find a tiny painting on one side, the exact bend in the Gunnison River where Lucas had pulled her from the water. "To remember where our story began," Lucas explained softly. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I could never forget," she whispered, "but I'll treasure this always." Lucas took the necklace from her hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin as he secured the clasp, sending familiar shivers down her spine. "Until tomorrow," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her shoulder before stepping back. "Until tomorrow," Victoria echoed, her heart full beyond measure. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. Victoria prepared in Rebecca Ames's rooms above the hotel, surrounded by the women who had become her friends and advocates over the past months. "You're the calmest bride I've ever seen," Martha Reynolds remarked as she adjusted Victoria's veil. "Why would I be nervous?" Victoria replied serenely. "I'm marrying the man who risked everything to ensure I could choose my own path. And I choose him with absolute certainty." The church was filled beyond capacity when Victoria arrived. Townsfolk and ranchers from miles around gathered to witness the culmination of what had become a legendary local romance. Sheriff Holloway himself stood at the back, vigilant despite the joyous occasion, his deputies positioned strategically around the building. But no disruption came. As Victoria walked down the aisle alone, a declaration of her independence from patriarchal tradition, she saw only Lucas waiting for her before the altar, his expression one of wonder and devotion that matched her own. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish, respect, and support each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the congregation seemed to shake the very rafters of the small church. The celebration at O'Connor Ranch lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing beneath lanterns strung across the new barn. Victoria and Lucas moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separated throughout the evening. As the festivities began to wind down, Walter approached them, more formally dressed than Victoria had ever seen him, a glass of whiskey in his weathered hand. "Speech time," he announced, loud enough to draw the attention of the remaining guests. "Won't take but a minute." The crowd quieted, turning expectantly toward the old ranch hand who had been Lucas's right hand for so many years. "Known this boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," Walter began, nodding toward Lucas. "Watched him grow into a man his father would be proud of. But something was missing all these years, someone to share the dream with, someone who understood that freedom and love are two sides of the same coin." He raised his glass toward Victoria. "Then this one came floating down the river like some kind of miracle, too stubborn to drown and too proud to be owned. Perfect match for our equally stubborn and proud Lucas." Laughter rippled through the crowd at this assessment. "To Lucas and Victoria O'Connor," Walter concluded, his voice growing husky with emotion. "May your lives together be as rich as the land you tend, and may you always remember that the greatest treasures aren't found in gold mines or cattle herds, but in each other." To Lucas and Victoria. The guests echoed, raising their glasses in a final toast. Later that night, as the last guests departed and quiet settled over the ranch, Victoria stood with Lucas on the porch of what was now truly their home. His arm encircled her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled Colorado sky. "Happy, Mrs. O'Connor?" he asked softly. Victoria leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength that had supported her through so much uncertainty. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. "And you?" "I pulled a half-drowned woman from a river and found the other half of my soul," Lucas replied, turning her gently to face him. "I'd say that makes me the luckiest man in the territory." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Victoria silently thanked the desperate courage that had driven her into the Gunnison's waters that fateful day. What had seemed like an end had proven to be merely the beginning of freedom, of purpose, of a love born in adversity, and strengthened through shared struggle. Her family had chased her into the river, but it was Lucas O'Connor who had pulled her out on the other side. And in doing so, he had given her not just rescue, but a home, a future, and a love worth fighting for. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the O'Connor ranch house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family. Victoria smiled as she watched from the kitchen doorway while Lucas chased their 4-year-old son Thomas around the yard, the boy's delighted squeals punctuated by the happy babbling of 2-year-old Catherine, who toddled after them on determined little legs. "Careful with your sister, Thomas," Victoria called, though she knew Lucas was keeping a watchful eye on both children. "He's got her, don't worry," Walter assured her from his rocking chair on the porch. At 73, the old ranch hand had officially retired, though he still insisted on helping with light chores and, more importantly, spoiling the O'Connor children shamelessly. Victoria returned to her baking, reflecting on the changes 5 years had brought. The ranch had prospered, expanding to include additional grazing land and a small orchard that produced the finest apples in the county. Lucas had established himself as a respected voice in territorial agricultural matters, occasionally traveling to Denver for meetings with government officials and fellow ranchers. Denver. The thought no longer filled Victoria with dread as it once had. Harrison Whitmore had eventually faced trial for the abduction, though his wealth and connections had ensured a lighter sentence than justice demanded. He had served a year in territorial prison before being released, his business empire diminished, but not destroyed by the scandal. Victoria's father had never reconciled with her choice, dying 2 years earlier without ever meeting his grandchildren. Her brothers occasionally sent stilted letters, their attitudes softening somewhat with time and distance, though they remained too much their father's sons for true reconciliation. These shadows from the past had faded in importance against the vibrant life she and Lucas had built together. Their home had become a gathering place for the community, their marriage a partnership that balanced Lucas's quiet strength with Victoria's determined spirit. The screen door banged open as Lucas entered, a child under each arm, all three flushed with exertion and joy. "These rascals claim they're hungry enough to eat an entire batch of biscuits," he announced, setting the children down carefully. "Is that so?" Victoria teased, bending to wipe a smudge of dirt from Catherine's chubby cheek. "And what makes you think I've made biscuits today?" "We can smell them, Mama," Thomas declared with absolute certainty. "And you always make biscuits on Saturdays." "Such clever children we have," Lucas observed, coming to stand behind Victoria, his arms encircling her waist as he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Wonder where they get that from." "Certainly their father," Victoria replied with a smile, "along with their boundless energy and inability to come indoors without bringing half the ranch with them." Lucas laughed, the sound still sending a pleasant warmth through Victoria even after 5 years of marriage. Guilty as charged. Later that evening, after the children were bathed and tucked into bed with stories of brave cowboys and clever heroines, Victoria and Lucas sat together on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Letter came today from Rebecca Ames," Lucas mentioned, reaching into his pocket. "She's accepted that offer to manage the new hotel in Montrose, says she'll stop by next month on her way there." "I'm glad," Victoria said sincerely. "She deserves this opportunity after working so hard at the Delta Hotel all these years." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the peaceful sounds of the ranch at nightfall surrounding them. A distant owl called, answered by its mate somewhere in the darkness. "I've been thinking," Lucas said eventually, taking Victoria's hand in his, about that stretch of land by the river, the one with the old cottonwoods." "What about it?" Victoria asked, curious about his thoughtful tone. "Thought it might make a good place for a school," he explained. "Delta's growing fast. The town school is getting crowded. We could donate the land, maybe help with the building." Victoria turned to study her husband's profile in the fading light. "A school would be wonderful, Lucas, but that's one of the prettiest spots on our property. You've always said it would make prime grazing when cleared." Lucas shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Some things are more important than cattle. Education, for instance. Giving children the chance to learn, to think for themselves, to choose their own paths in life." Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. "This is about what happened to me, isn't it? About ensuring other young women have options beyond what their fathers dictate." "Partly," Lucas admitted. "But it's also about our children, about the community we want them to grow up in. A place where learning is valued, where questions are encouraged rather than silenced." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, her heart full of love for this man who continued to surprise her with his depth and thoughtfulness. "I think it's a wonderful idea. The Linfield O'Connor School has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "I was thinking just the river school," Lucas suggested. "After all, it was a river that brought us together. Seems fitting that our legacy should honor that beginning." Victoria nodded, remembering the desperate young woman who had plunged into theGunnison's cold waters 5 years earlier, and the brave cowboy who had pulled her out on the other side. "The river school it is, then," she agreed softly. "A place where young minds can flow freely, finding their own course just as we found ours." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "Together." "Always together," Victoria affirmed, resting her head against his shoulder as the stars continued to emerge above their home, their land, their shared dream that had begun with a desperate flight and a courageous rescue, and had blossomed into a life more beautiful than either could have imagined.